I'm a sales rep at a construction company. Despite being a sales rep, I'm a po-talker. Because of this, I've always been troubled by my mediocre sales performance. And eventually, this month I was told relegated by my boss. I have a wife and a 3-year-old child. However, my wife has a job, so she couldn't move with me, and I reluctantly accepted a solitary work assignment. The place I was relegated to was a branch office in a regional city. The apartment provided by the branch office seemed to be well over 60 years old. The railings on the outside stairs are terribly rusty, and when I touched them, my hand got covered in rust. Some parts of the building were even decaying. Walking down the hallway inside the apartment, the floor creaked. There were no signs of anyone living around the apartment, and the whole area looked like a wasteland. I felt pathetic about myself that I had been relegated to such a place. I left the crummy apartment in the morning to the branch office, and as soon as it was time to leave, I hurried back to that apartment. For dinner, I ate a boxed meal I bought from a deli near the branch office. After dinner, there was nothing else to do, so I laid down on my bed, watched TV, and fell asleep. After living in such an apartment for a few days, something happened. As usual, I laid down on my bed in frustration and watched TV. And I gradually felt drowsy and fell asleep with the TV still on. Just as I was falling asleep, I thought I heard a tapping sound and woke up. Half asleep, I thought it was the sound of the TV left on, so I turned it off and climbed back into my bed. But then, I heard the tapping sound again. It was clearer than before. Huh? I looked in the direction of the sound. Apparently, the sound was coming from the wall of my room next door. It sounded like someone was knocking on the wall of my room. This time, I jumped up from my bed, tried not to make noise, and I listened it carefully. The sound reverberates regularly and steadily. At this hour, who could it be? According to the General Affairs Department of the branch office, no one else was living in this crummy apartment. At that moment, I was frightened and turned on all the lights in the room. That said, the only lights in the room were in the entrance, kitchen, and my room, which was only 3 places. My room became instantly bright. There was no one in the room, and I thought to myself, thank God. My heart was starting to calm down. Then, who's knocking on the wall? Thinking this, I collected my courage and put my ear to the wall. Along with the tapping sound, I heard a faint sound from the wall, ow ow, like someone struggling. I shouted at the wall, "Is anyone there?" I banged on the wall. From the wall, a clear knockback sound and a sound like someone coughing came back. In a hurry, I went out to the hallway of the apartment and turned on all the lights. Then I ran down the creaking hallway and opened the door to the next room. The door creaked open. There was an old lady with disheveled white hair. The old lady was coughing and seemed to be in pain. I fetched a cup of water from the kitchen and gave it to her while asking if she was okay and rubbing her back. Her coughing has calmed down?
Could I have another glass of water, please?
She asked. Sure, and what happened? Why are you coughing so much in the middle of the night? I asked.
I just really wanted to eat donuts in this room.
She explained she had eaten some donuts. It seemed that some of the piece of the donuts had inadvertently gotten into her windpipe.
I started to choke and couldn't stop coughing.
She said, "Oh, I see. I think a piece of donuts went down the wrong pipe." I replied. She was so distressed that she had ended up knocking on the wall for help.
Thank you for coming to help an old lady like me, even at this hour of the night.
She said with gratitude. No problem, I'm glad it wasn't anything serious. I reassured her and said good night, then left her room. Wait, her room? Was there actually a room for the old lady in this crummy apartment? But Once I got back to my room, a sudden wave of sleepiness overtook me and I fell asleep immediately. The next morning, I woke up at the same time as usual. When I woke up, I felt as if what had happened the night before had been a dream. I pinched my cheek hard. Ouch! It didn't feel like a dream, but I still went to work at the branch office. After finishing my tasks for the day, I began to dwell on the events of last night. I went to the General Affairs Department at the branch office and asked. The next room in my apartment was not a vacant room. I met an old lady there last night.
What?
The department head, looking flustered, began to flip through some documents in a binder. When he found the page he was looking for, he said,
Well, it does say vacant.
He showed me the information about the apartment. Really? I replied.
That apartment is actually a redevelopment project of our company.
He said. Moreover, they plan to redevelop the entire surrounding area of that apartment. They had been informing the old residents about this and asking them to move out. Now, the last resident had moved out and they were preparing to rebuild the place into a new condominium. Then why am I living there? Then he said it's because if the whole area was abandoned, it would be dangerous. That's why they had me, as the manager of the old apartment on behalf of the company, live there. In other words, I was like a security guard for that apartment. That day, as soon as I got off work, I rushed back to the apartment. Then, I timidly knocked on the next room's door. No response. Excuse me, ma'am, you're there, right? Then I opened the door. Inside, just like the night before, was a single old woman sitting quietly, looking drained. There is a cup lying around in the empty room. I asked, why are you alone in this room? I then gently explained to her that all the residents of this apartment had been evacuated and that it was set to be demolished soon. The old lady was quietly listening to my words, occasionally nodding in understanding. That's why you have to leave this room, ma'am, I reiterated.
I've known that for a long time, probably since the plan started.
She counted. She began to talk about that she was the first resident of this apartment. She understood that it's not allowed to be here anymore, but she wanted to witness the end of this apartment and had come from her home to do it. She and her husband moved into this apartment right after they got married. They had lost everything in the war. Family, neighbors, their house, schools, everything. As a young woman who had lost all her family, she was led by the thread of destiny to meet her husband, and they ended up together. The two of them, who had become a new family in this world, lived by pooling their strength and supporting each other. She said that it was around the time when buildings started appearing gradually on the scorched earth left by the war. They lived together in this apartment, which was brand new at the time. In this room, they worked together, gave birth and raised their children, and watched their growth.
It's been a long time since then.
Her eyes welling up with tears as she remembered the past. I found myself tearing up as well.
Life is long, and a lot has happened. There were good times and bad.
In particular, there was an incident that still sends shivers down her spine to remember. She and her husband had taken out a large loan from a bank in their youth.
We couldn't pay back the debt.
She said. The day before the repayment deadline, she and her husband had cried in each other's arms.
There were times when we even thought that the three of us, my husband, our young child, and I, might jump off from the apartment and die together tomorrow.
She confessed, covering her eyes with her hands as she remembered the vivid scene. She still has nightmares about that day. Dreams of apologizing to the bank representative, saying, I'm sorry, please wait a little longer. And wake up covered in sweat, relieved that it was only a dream. This room contained all these family stories. I realized anew that this room, with its stained walls, was the old lady's unforgettable room, carrying all these past memories. Later, they resolved their issues with the bank, and the young old lady, her husband, and their child moved out of this apartment. They had worked hard and were able to move into a slightly larger room than here. I was glad for the old lady. As time went by, her husband passed away. Her son got married and they were blessed with grandchildren. Now, she lives happily with her son and his family. The old lady, who had survived the fires of war, had lived through the chaos after the war, and finally found her own happiness. Later, she was told by her son that the entire area around this apartment was to be redeveloped and this cherished apartment was to be demolished.
I absolutely objected to this apartment being demolished.
The old lady told me. Then she showed me the crumpled property deed, saying she still owned the rights to this room. It was a genuine deed. "Why do you still have it, ma'am?" I asked. That was a document that she should have returned to my company.
"This deed is mine. I won't give it to anyone,"
she said, holding the document to her chest. What a stubborn old lady. According to the plan to demolish this apartment, all residents, including those living around the apartment, have been asked to evacuate temporarily. I told her, "We're redeveloping the site to construct a big, brand new apartment. The lower floors will be filled with stores, commercial buildings, and office spaces, while the upper floors will be transformed into residential spaces for those who evacuated their homes," I said. My company made a promise to provide a living space many times bigger than what the people had previously, as a way of giving back to them. We absolutely intend to keep that promise. So, ma'am, you can trust us with your rights. I carefully and clearly explained to her, just as I was trained to do at my company.
"Even without your explanation, I understand all that perfectly well,"
she replied, shaking her head. Tears rolled down her face as she expressed her deep wish to keep this room. She told her son about this, and he said,
"I'd love to keep that memory-filled apartment too. After all, it's where our family began. It's the place where our family once considered ending our lives."
He comforted his mother, but added,
"However, Mom, we can't fight the flow of the times."
It was clear that her son, always busy, wasn't taking her concerns seriously. This was her grievance with him. She also shared her feelings with her grandson, but,
"Granny, the world is moving towards redevelopment and high-rise condos now.
he warned her.
If we don't keep up with the times, we might end up in the same dire situation we were in back when we lived in that apartment with Grandpa."
He added,
"It's not just about us anymore. I now have a responsibility towards many employees and their families too."
The old lady, tears welling up in her eyes again, says that she truly understands all of this. She admits that her head understands, but her heart simply can't say yes and accept it, as she clutches her chest. So she understood all this, I realized. Yet, she found it hard to bear the thought of the demolition of this apartment, where she had experienced so much joy and sorrow. The next day, and the day after that, I kept knocking on her door, worried about her. But nothing changed. She continued pouring out her feelings to me. All I could do was listen, responding with silent nods. She just wanted someone to lend her an ear. I'm not good at speaking, but I'm good at listening. That's my strength. I realized this while listening to her. It was the 5th night. Finally, I shared the plan I had been thinking about with the old lady. "What if we relocate this room to a part of your new apartment in the high-rise?" At first, she looked puzzled, but gradually, a glimmer of hope appeared on her face. "Thank you," she said with gratitude. Over and over, she whispered, "Thank you." I left her room feeling happy. From that day on, there was no noise from her room. I opened the door to check on her, but she was not there. I assumed that she had finally made peace with the situation and returned to her son's house. Soon, my work became hectic, and I found less and less time to think about her. The sound of redevelopment, including the demolition of that old apartment, soon filled the air. I was swamped with work, scrambling to recruit residents for the new apartment. A few weeks later, at last, tomorrow is the day of the demolition of that crummy apartment. Then I was called to the branch manager's office. Did I do something wrong again? I wondered. Am I going to get chewed out for post-sales performance? I nervously knocked on the office door. May I come in?
Come in.
Sure. Then, in the branch manager's office, the branch manager, the head of sales, and an elegant elderly woman quietly sitting on a chair. The elderly woman addressed me.
Thank you very much for taking care of me in that apartment.
I looked at her face in surprise. Are you the old lady from that crummy apartment? What are you saying? I was scolded by the branch manager.
She's the wife of our company's founder.
What? Really? So why was she, the founder's wife, in that crummy apartment late at night? Her explanation was as follows.
My husband and I were young when we decided to start a real estate business. We borrowed money from the bank and finally managed to secure an apartment to start with.
However, their business was rocked by the oil shock, and they faced bankruptcy in no time. Eventually, they could not repay their bank loan, and they had to let go of the apartment the very next day. That night, the young couple and their little son had their last dinner in the living room of the apartment. The husband brought home his wife's favorite donuts with plenty of chocolate sauce, which they divided into two and ate. I couldn't help but feel emotional. She said she still remembered that donuts tasted a little bit salty even though they were with chocolate sauce.
That's because of my tears.
She explained. I felt tears come to my eyes. However, the next morning, there was a long line of potential customers waiting for a viewing outside the apartment. It's because she had distributed flyers around the housing complex, advertising it as a modern apartment, and it struck a chord with the residents. Thanks to her salesmanship, they managed to bounce back from bankruptcy. Good for her? Wait a minute. I've heard this story somewhere. Yes, of course. This is the story written in the founding edition of my company's corporate history. So, the legendary figure in our sales department, the sales genius who distributed the flyers, is her. I felt humble and respect for her in my heart. However, a question popped up in my mind. I nervously asked her, no, the founder's wife, why were you eating donuts in the room next to mine that night? She replied,
Because that room next to yours was the room where our business started.
I remembered then. That crummy apartment was where my company was founded. And with that, everything clicked into place. I said to her, I have proposed to the head of the sales department that we relocate that room. Everyone looked at the head of the sales department at once.
You got me, Granny. We all knew that you were out and about at night. The chauffeur of the family car reported it too. Who'd have thought you were having such a conversation in that apartment with an ordinary employee like him? If it's Granny's request, I can't refuse.
With the words of the head of the sales department, the matter was settled. I was happy for her. So, the head of the sales department is her grandson, and the company's president is her son. I really played the fool, didn't I?
Thank you very much. Thanks to you, I was able to organize my thoughts.
She said so. Moreover,
You, who listen well to the residents and make appropriate proposals from their perspective, are a commendable member of our sales department.
she praised me, saying she was happy to have an employee like me. I was delighted. More than that, it was a source of pride that I could make new proposals to the residents as a salesperson. the branch manager said.
That's why, at the request of her, I'm appointing you as the leader of the sales department for the new condominiums.
She said that my sincere personality would surely be appreciated by the customers. Is it true? I pinched my cheek as hard as I could. It hurt. This is not a dream. It's real life. I was delighted again. Subsequently, the redevelopment project in the area, including the new condominiums, was a great success. I became a respected figure in the company as the leader of the sales department. Perhaps becoming an executive in the future is not just a dream, and I received the top floor of the new condominium from the company and brought my wife and child over. Now we are happily living together. Guess what? We're neighbors with her, the founder's wife. Even now, I'm still a sincere conversational partner for her.